So it's GPT 3.5, and well, it has a bunch of, so that language model is prompted with quite a lot of text every time you see it speak. So every 10 seconds or so it thinks, and one round of thinking is where it receives observations about the world, it receives its past actions, it receives what other people have said in the chat and what it has said, and then it kind of generates its next action, which might be walking or speaking. And then what's happening every time it thinks is that it takes its summary of its, so it takes the text of its current mind, which is all that stuff put together, and it computes an embedding vector. So an embedding vector is the sort of internal language of GPT. So the way GPT works is it takes a string of text and it processes it, transforms it into vectors, and then computes on those vectors. And if you just extract those vectors, that's basically like the thought vector. That it's what GPT has in its mind when it reads that text. Okay, so you can access those vectors directly via another API. So what I do is, first of all, I took every page of your book, Brighter, and computed the vector for that page. So I took the text of the page. There's a Python script running on a server somewhere that grabbed each page, turned it into text, fed that text to the embedding API, and then stored all those vectors in an online vector database called Pinecone. So every page has a vector. And now every 10 seconds, what happens is that your simulacrum there, it takes its mind, all that data that I just mentioned, observations, past actions, what people have said, what it has thought. So it has internal thoughts that it's not speaking about what it should do and what it thinks about various topics. So it takes all of that, computes a vector, and then it looks in that database for similar vectors. And it's based on the direction they point. So the vectors are in 1536 dimensional vector space. So it looks in that high dimensional vector space at the direction that its current thought vector is pointing, and looks for the pages of your book that are pointing in a similar direction. And those directions are sort of semantic content. So if you ask it about precision fermentation, all the pages that mention precision fermentation, or maybe not even the text, like the strict text directly, but just are about that topic, will be aligned with that thought vector. And so it pulls them into its short-term memory, and then it can, and then GPT-3, its prompt has that page in it. So in addition to its thoughts and our questions, it has that entire page of your book, and then it generates this one sentence with all of that as its input.
Wow. I mean, it's astonishing. It really is. It's amazing. Yeah. Well, it's like you were discussing in your talk at the festival, Dan, that it really is pretty stunning what has turned out, what has emerged as possible with these approaches. I mean, naively, you might express skepticism that these approaches could be able to produce these kinds of results. Certainly I would have thought, you know, something different would have been required, or something more components. It astounds me, absolutely astounds me, what has emerged to be possible. Yeah, it's super duper cool. And your implementation here is awesome. I did end up, after I emailed you, I posted the video on Slack for folks in my team to see, and everybody thought it was amazing. So, very cool.
What astounds me is how easy this was, really. I mean, okay, there's a few moving parts, and maybe it sounds...
It's easy for you.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's not easy for everybody to do this, but it's very simple, right? Really, it's very, like... the idea of just turning your question or your mind into a vector and then computing a dot product with a bunch of other vectors and then dragging that in. I mean, that is internally how GPT works, right? So what I'm doing here is kind of like an outer layer that's very similar to the internal attention mechanism that GPT uses to actually process information. So internally, GPT is computing exactly dot products of this kind. So it has a vector for a word, it computes the dot product with vectors for other words in the sentence to see what's relevant, and propagates information that way. So this is kind of like an outer loop that's quite similar to the inner loop. So it's kind of idiosyncratic, idiomatic in that sense. I think he's asking you a question, Adam. What motivates you to continue working for Rethink X? Well, the robot will never lose faith, Adam. He'll just be here until the end of time.
It'll be a reminder of me to not be cynical, to lose my optimism. Which, I've been tested pretty well, but so far so good. Still optimistic, still hopeful.
Okay, what should we talk about today?
It's just so cool, Dan. And I mean, what you forgive me for maybe mischaracterizing what this is and what you've done. And I can't pretend to understand any, even a fraction of what you, even as you explain it, I'm kind of just, nodding along foolishly. But this strikes me as something very much like a kind of service that my organization, people in my organization desperately want, and I can only imagine would be very, very, very useful for others. And that is to be able to provide a corpus of material to a model like this in whatever way, however you interface it with API or chat or whatever. But at any rate, say, here, please read this, digest this, and XYZ. And so in my case, you've found a way, and it's taken some doing, and a normal person would not have a prayer in hell of doing it, but you've made it look easy to, as you said, package up my book and turn it into something that this model is able to interact with, and then take advantage of that as if it were, we're able to digest or learn from or think within the context of, or however you want to phrase it, that material. And I can tell you from my perspective as a scientist, my perspective as a employee of an organization that does this kind of work, the capacity to do that is going to be just stupendously valuable, right? Just to be able to ask for summaries of things, just to be able to ask for reactions to things, and summaries of various kinds, like what's the main idea here, or what's the main thesis. Write me a paragraph that summarizes these 5 key points from this document that was written in 100 pages in just a few sentences. That is so much of my work involves doing that sort of thing, reading, digesting, repackaging, drawing insights out from, trying to figure out what's, separate the wheat from the chaff, and then communicate that within a new context. It would just be immensely valuable. It'd be an incredible time saver. I'm hoping that Owen will have some luck, maybe replicating a little bit of what you've done here, for example, for our team with our other publications, including my publication, but then perhaps all of Rethink X's stuff, and then maybe think of expanding the corpus beyond there. But we have to be just one of millions of people in groups and organizations that are thinking along these lines of how incredibly useful this tool could be, because this is something this is something that so many of us do as part of our work, right? And it's so time consuming. I mean, that's the other thing, is it's not like hiring a human being. Maybe this is something that we could it might be worth talking about a little bit, because we've this is not a bad idea as a potential topic of discussion for disruption, right? What's the right way to phrase this? Okay. So a lot of the conversation that I've seen about AI up until recently is centered on the assumption that AI will, or has the potential to automate tasks and to replace human beings in certain roles. What I've seen less of is the connecting that to thinking, which was very familiar in an earlier era, that machines could do things orders of magnitude faster or more precisely, or with orders of magnitude more, strength or whatever than a human being could do. And so my impression is that fact of the situation has been relegated to, maybe a secondary consideration. Now, maybe that's me misreading the situation. Maybe that's me misreading the conversations and how people are talking. But from my perspective, there's a lot of chatter about how roles within an organization will potentially be replaced by AI, and less discussion now about the how much more capable these tools are in terms of their speed and other attributes. And so, for example, in the same way that a bulldozer can just move a huge amount of earth compared to a person, and a bulldozer therefore doesn't just replace the role of a person with a shovel, it does vastly more than that. A tool that can do what I just described, read and digest a report, pull out the main ideas, that sort of thing. If the AI could do that 10,000 times faster than a person, that's very different. That's an additional disruptive feature or element beyond just replacing the role of the person who would have done that task. Because I suppose in the limit, that same AI could replace 10,000 such roles in those tasks. So I hope I'm making that in a fairly clear and sensible way, that it would be more disruptive. Even I'm thinking in my own personal work, to have this capability, because it would do more than just replace the role or that job that a human being has to do right now. Being able to do that job and then also do it in a few seconds would be transformative in an additional way. So when we talk about the potential of automation to replace human labor, that's true. And there are plenty of discussions about what that could look like. It could free human beings up from toil and drudgery and open the door to various sci-fi depictions of positive futures, from Star Trek to whatever else. But perhaps it's just difficult to wrap our arms around the idea of being so much more capable in a particular role that is replaced or that is automated. And so those two things seem to me, the replacement of a role and then the massive increase in performance, at least on the dimension of speed, if nothing else, in that role, those two things seem to me to be distinct. I don't know how orthogonal they really are, but they seem to be quite distinct. And if we're talking about AI and automation serving the interest of prosperity, well, the turbocharging or the acceleration of the work itself has got to be almost as impactful, maybe even more impactful ultimately, than the replacement of the individual roles, right?
Sorry, say that again. The acceleration of what?
Well, acceleration, but I mean not acceleration, but I mean the increased, the faster speed.
Oh yeah,
has got to be. That's got to be as big a deal. Well, I don't know. It's got to be. Let's make it an open question. Is the potential of AI to do things so much more quickly and potentially with so much more accuracy, so not just faster but perhaps better in other senses, what are the implications of that dimension of the disruption for prosperity? And we could think of for harm and chaos and so forth as well. But what are its implications? In addition to the implications of just obviating human beings in those roles. So if you replaced everybody in an organization with an AI that wasn't equally effective, but was, 100 times faster and made 100 times fewer mistakes, or pick any multipliers you want, that must have a different kind of impact qualitatively in terms of productivity, and then leading on to prosperity, than merely replacing human beings and freeing human beings up to, just relax while the machines do all the work. And sorry, one final thing to note is that idea, and I don't know why I didn't articulate it fully or clearly before now, but that idea is completely consistent with what we've seen in other disruptions, which is that we have Rethink X has a standard line, which is that disruptive technologies are not merely substitutions for older technologies. Technological substitution is different than technological disruption. Disruptions have this additional element of providing not a one-to-one replacement of the previous technology or capabilities, but of providing a multiple of greater value and capability that can be realized. And of course, that's the case here with AI and automation. So yeah, anyway, I don't know what we think about that, and I wouldn't know. Well, anyway, yeah, I'll leave it there as an open idea and question.
Great topic. Yeah, this is also basically what I was going to suggest, so that's good. Yeah, I think it's an important observation to make about the current systems, like the one we're watching here and ChatGPT, is that their key advantages are speed. Like with many forms of automation early on, it's not necessarily that this doesn't substitute for all human cognition, and even fairly basic cognition. Maybe you'd still ultimately prefer a person, but this is just so fast, and this is really what people underestimate. So yeah, I think I agree that what we'll see in the early phases of this now, eventually, and eventually maybe means 10 years, I don't know, eventually just all bets are off and there's just nothing interesting to say because the machines can do everything. But in the interim, what we'll see, it's very important to think through how the nature of this technology and what it's good at and what it makes easy is going to push on some areas of our arrangement of labor and our coordination very differently to other areas. So, and the radical speed of this technology is one of the important things. So just to give you an example, I took your talk at the festival. I took the transcript from YouTube. I chunked it into 7, so that's about an hour and a half. I chunked it into 7 blocks of text because of the token limit of ChatGPT. That's the longest I can paste into the text box there. So I pasted it in there and asked it for a summary. I got 7 paragraphs. I then took those 7 paragraphs and asked it for a summary and also a title. So here is what ChatGPT distilled that 1.5 hours down to. I asked it for a 5-word title. And the 5-word title was Optimistic Vision for Environmental Disruption, which is not bad, right?
That's not bad at all.
And the paragraph that it... So I asked it for a YouTube description, because what I'm going to do is we're just going to automate the production of titles and YouTube descriptions for the videos of seminars, because currently I write them, and ChatGPT will just do it better, because it's faster and it can process all the information. How am I actually summarizing it usually? I look in my memory and I look through the clips and I kind of notice a few important things and then I stick them in there. And if I spent half an hour per video on it, it'd probably be better than ChatGPT. But ChatGPT, I mean, if you take out the 30 seconds it took me to copy and paste things and babysit ChatGPT while it was generating, if I just automate all that, it'll take 10 seconds, right? So here's ChatGPT's summary of that 1.5 hours. The speaker argues that modern environmentalism is characterized by pessimism because most environmentalists have not been able to see how major environmental problems like climate change can be solved without incurring huge losses of human prosperity and quality of life. They believe that pessimism is a result
Perfect.
of despair and hopelessness in the face of obstacles, and that the modern environmental movement sees sacrifice and the downgrading of human prosperity as the only way to achieve sustainability. However, the speaker argues that this assumption is false and dangerous. They believe that environmental problems can be solved with innovation, new knowledge, and ideas, and that science and technology... then at the end it's like a bit of a strange construction. I'll just read it. They believe that environmental problems can be solved with innovation, new knowledge and ideas, and science and technology, and that this assumption, and it's referring to the assumption of environmentalists there, this assumption undermines confidence in the idea of progress itself. So I would reword that last bit, but apart from that, it's basically perfect, right? I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, it's amazingly good. I would be interested to see how it summarizes because that's good at a high level, very good at a high level. That technology and ideas and science can actually solve our problems. It would be interesting to see how it handles the follow-on of the specifics, like and the specific technologies are these solar, wind, and batteries, and that they're getting cheaper, and that they're going to outcompete older, dirtier technologies faster than people expect, and so forth. But it's astonishing how good that is. Astonishing. And if I could, again, it's just so fantastic, because if I want to condense a summary of my book, even my own damn thinking, into something very, very tight, like, for example, a script that I wanted to be able to read if I were doing a radio interview, which I had to write myself. Those can be very time consuming to write. And if I could obtain something of that quality from, a chatbot in a few seconds, and then just polish it up for a few minutes, it would just be such a faster and ultimately better, with an ultimately better result. It'd be such a faster process with a better result. So that's very exciting that you were able to achieve that so quickly and easily. It's amazing. One funny, I think I would suggest, you were talking about automating the production of titles. I don't know what'll happen, but you ought to ask, if it's GPT you're working with, or whatever, you ought to ask it to create a title that will succeed, in YouTube's algorithms, or whatever, something that's catchy, and and you know what I mean. You know what I'm getting at. And see if it does a good job of writing. I don't know what it'll do. Like, will it capitalize a random word in the middle and make it all hyperbolic to make it, catch eyeballs and attract clicks? In other words, maybe it's something simple like, and make sure that it's a clickbait title.
Well, let me paste the summary. Ask ChatGPT now. Give a clickbaity, very attractive title for this talk on YouTube. It's thinking. I don't know. Revolutionizing environmentalism. How innovation, science, and technology can save the planet and uplift human prosperity.
Well, it's a little more clickbaity.
Make it shorter and more clickbaity.
It's...
Save the planet.
More concise is better.
Save the planet. Uplift prosperity. The future of environmentalism. More clickbaity. Make it very clickbaity.
With some words capitalized or something like that.
Unlock the secrets to saving the planet and thriving. The environmentalism of the future. Yeah, it's okay.
Amazing. Oh my god, that's just amazing.
Let's come back to the speed issue. So so Tyler Cowen, who I've mentioned in the seminar before, as an economist at George Mason University, and he's one of the people online who's very open to new technology, an early adopter of YouTube, and I believe he's in his 60s. So he's like adopted blogging very early, adopted podcasts early, and is a big proponent of incorporating ChatGPT and GPT into your workflows, and indeed insists that if you don't do so, then you're going to be left behind in productivity terms. And one of the things he's observed, and I agree with this, is that, so what do we use conversation for? often it's to refine our thinking, right? And it's effective out of proportion to how you might, like, if you look back at a conversation, say a conversation we have, and maybe it's not like every sentence is sparkling with insight, right? But nonetheless, the benefit we derive from it just ourselves can be much greater than it appears to be if you just looked at the transcript and like processed it for raw insight per minute, right? It's part of the process of cognition. And what Cowan has observed, and I've also observed, is that the interactions you have with systems like ChatGPT are getting to the level of quality. It's not like a conversation. It's not as good as a good conversation, but conversations are scarce, right? It's very hard to arrange conversations with people who can really bounce ideas backwards and forwards with you. But ChatGPT is, for now, free, and it's there all the time, and it's just waiting, and you can feed it whatever context you like. I mean, I can email you a book to read before we chat, but I don't know, you may not read it, right? ChatGPT will just, I can paste in there whatever I like, and it's limited, but it's fast, and it's cheap, and it's always available. And that actually changes the equilibrium for interacting with other humans in the idea generation process. And that's a big change. I think people are maybe not anticipating. There will be increasingly many people who adopt conversation with these tools as an essential part of their loop of generating and refining thought in a way that, I mean, we've talked about the primacy of conversation for a long time, right? Sam Harris that's his whole tagline, and it's an idea that goes back a very long way and was emphasized in the Enlightenment. We come together, we discuss our ideas. There's like a market of ideas, and through conversation we attempt to ferret out the mistakes and refine those ideas. And that's basic to our idea of democracy and also the idea of science. But there's like this new element to that story, which is on the side, every individual has this potential to now hold these conversations that are as fast as they can type or speak, and effectively free, and retain context over time, right? It's like having a diary that just knows what you've been talking about and speaks back to you. And it's not perfect, right? But it's really cheap and really fast. So yeah, I think that's. I think if you're involved in, if you're a public intellectual or something like that, or you're involved in generating ideas, it seems like you have to adopt this tool or perish. It seems to me.
Yeah, I have this very strongly. I feel the same way. I've had that suspicion very strongly held for a number of months now, that if we in our knowledge creation capacity or capacities as knowledge workers don't adopt these tools, then we will very rapidly become uncompetitive. We will, obsolescence could occur very, very quickly if nothing else in terms of the speed of your output. I suppose the quality of output could be a separate consideration, but even if we're mediocre output at a much higher rate, a much higher volume of output, that has the potential in many spaces to give you a competitive advantage. And I suspect very strongly that I personally and my team, we will need to adopt these tools in a big hurry in order to retain our competitive edge. I'm sure in our line of work, these tools are going to be embraced and utilized. If they aren't already, they're in the process of being adopted aggressively. So I know that I've made concerted effort to lay the groundwork for acquiring that capability sooner rather than later. In fact, it's probably something Dan, that I would like to talk with you offline about. figuring out the best way to do that based on your own experiences, having successfully done some of this already right here, and demoed it in MetaUni, which is astonishing. It's just incredible. And then in addition to that, then that's sort of the utilization of the technology ourselves, which is kind of fun. In the same way that riding an electric car is fun for us, even though we spend a lot of time thinking and writing about these things and the disruptive potential. My team will undoubtedly need to begin to grapple with the implications of these new tools, these new AI tools, very soon as well. And we have really struggled up until now to find novel and original things to say, and struggled to produce genuinely novel and interesting and useful insights that are comparable to the ones we feel we've produced in the energy space, the transportation space, and the food space. We've not achieved that, or felt like we've achieved enough there to be able to publish anything in the AI and automation space. But I'm hopeful that we will be able to do that, and it would be ironic, or it would be maybe not ironic, but maybe sort of a fitting outcome if it were these tools themselves that allowed us to make more headway in generating ideas and useful insights about them. Wouldn't that be cool? So yeah, it's something that weighs on my mind a lot. And just to get back to this idea of the qualitative difference, well, it's quantitative as well, obviously, but the oh, sorry, what is that? Is that a joke? Oh, wait.
Yeah. What is the 3-step formula for being successful? Yeah, it's gone.
Oh, I missed it. Yeah. Can we get him to say?
Yeah, let's just ask him to repeat it.
What?
Yeah, it's based on the previous joke. The jokes are very nerdy jokes where it's like a subtle implication. Yeah, that's not very funny. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Now, is it using the book? Because there's a reference in the book, one reference to the idea that we can't hide in the cave and wait out the storm.
Oh, it's almost certainly had that page in its mind when it made that, yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. That's very, very cool.
So it does tend to get a bit obsessed. So once it pulls a page into its working memory, then of course when it goes looking for other pages, similar pages will occur to it. So it can sort of become kind of obsessed with, it might now just want to keep talking about caves. I don't know. So, yeah, on the...
Well, like a young child.
Yeah, right. Let me add another anecdote in the conversation. So there was a discussion in the MetaUni Discord. Liam posted an article in the New York Times. I don't know if you saw it, Adam. This film does not exist. So it was about someone used Midjourney to create stills from a imagined version of Tron made by I don't know how to pronounce his name. Jodorowsky. He's famous for preparing a very large tome of artwork for a version of Dune that never got made. I don't know if you know this story.
I think I heard about it, but I haven't I haven't read it.
Yeah. Anyway, so the article was about so the author had made a documentary about Jodorowsky's work and how influential it was. So that version of Dune was never made, but the artwork became very influential. So the aesthetic for Alien, for example, owes a lot to Jodorowsky's.
Oh yeah, I do remember.
Work.
I remember reading about. I've heard about this. Yes, I missed the story about Tron and so forth. I do know the story of the version of Dune that was never made. I've heard of this. Yes.
So somebody made these stills for Tron, and this guy who's been immersed in Jodorowsky's work had this very strange and it seems quite moving interaction with that body of pictures, because they really were somehow in the style of Jodorowsky, and just to imagine that there was this other hidden movie that never got made was somehow quite an interesting experience for him. And I read the article, and it's fine. But my first thought after I read it was, I think ChatGPT could have done a better job. Like, there was nothing wrong with the article. It was well written, but there just wasn't really anywhere in it an insight where I read it and thought, oh, that didn't occur to me, right? It felt like the kind of thing that you would write on the topic that we just described, right? So one of the places where I think we'll become incredibly intolerant of human writing is if it just doesn't go beyond that, right? Now, a lot of our productions, the polish is enough, right? In the New York Times, most of the articles, there's not really anything in them, right? I mean, they're just well written and they're fact checked and they're careful, but that's kind of good enough for today, but it's, well, yesterday, but it's not good enough anymore, right? So what I did was I took the lead of that article and I put it into ChatGPT and I just badgered it to say something insightful, right? I just, write something very insightful, blah, 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 and gave it a bunch of, instruction. And it came up with something, which is the following paragraph. It said, one of the key themes in Jodorowsky's work is the idea of the alchemical film, in which the process of filmmaking is seen as a transformative journey for both the creators and the audience. But what happens when that process is replaced by algorithms and artificial intelligence? Is the resulting film still alchemical in any sense? And that's actually an interesting comment. So Jodorowsky was really into alchemy and Jungian symbolism, and this is really in line with, it gets to the heart of why he was interested in film and what a challenge to that motivating interest AI technologies in filmmaking is. So now that I've seen that comment, this is the only thing that is worth saying in the context of the juxtaposition of Jodorowsky and AI, and it's missing from the New York Times article. So if you're not putting your article into ChatGPT and badgering it to come up with insights, you're just like not doing your job now, right? That's not to say that the article would be better written by ChatGPT overall, right? Its writing is still kind of generic in places and a bit formulaic and lacking in poetry and all that. But like, if you're not working with these tools to there's money on the table just outside your range of attention, right? Like, we have this narrow cone of attention and we're taking it over the landscape and picking up the money and the ideas that we can see. But just outside that cone of attention, there's often stuff laying there that, just because of lack of time and attention, we don't see. And if you're not using the AI to help you search that landscape for the real idea, you might just miss it. And then look like a fool because it really was just on the, the tip of your tongue. You could have come up with it. But it's almost like due diligence in the space of ideas, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. It strikes me as an evolution of novelty, and we are attracted, I think, innately on some levels, many of us, perhaps all of us. I don't know the evolutionary psychology behind the human attraction to an affinity for novelty, but certainly novelty it features prominently in content of many kinds that attract us: news content and entertainment content and intellectual content now. And it could be that genuine insights or things that are non-obvious, and I don't know how we would define or quantify that quality, that property, I should say, not quality, but property, the property of a non-obvious insight. It seems like that could become part of new currency for where we recognize value in content. And certainly this is a target of the lack thereof in the generative AI outputs is there's a drumbeat now. There's a beating of the drum among critics that this is a blind spot for the moment, that it's a failing. That, well, yes, okay, you DALL-E 2 and Midjourney and Stable Diffusion and these other generative AI image generating AIs and the chat GPT and other language, generating, text generating tools, they do an amazing job of reproducing content, perhaps even in a style that you ask for, but people have not seen anything fundamentally novel or new, or they say they haven't, or they argue that those things cannot emerge as a result of simply recombining the data in the training sets. And that, I mean, again, and all of this is sort of it strikes me as a bit of copium. It strikes me as a bit of wishful and magical thinking. And also it strikes me as a bit of desperate ethno or egocentrism or anthropocentrism, I guess. Anthropocentrism is the right word, where we're hoping that human beings do something magical or special, and very likely that hubris, we were going to be humbled and realize that there wasn't anything all that special that was going on, and that most art is just stolen and recombined in simple ways. But maybe not. Maybe there are, fundamentally, maybe breakthroughs do happen. Certainly, you could argue that they've happened in the past. Whether or not there's an infinite possibility space ahead, I don't know. So you could argue that, for example, what Jackson Pollock did a century or more ago was fundamentally new and something that nobody had ever seen before, and that no recombination of existing art by a human being or a less creative human being, or, for example, by a generative AI like DALL-E 2, that a century ago, before art like what Jackson Pollock produced, that couldn't have been, it would not have been and could not have been produced by these sort of simple processes of inferring through cross or combination or something like that. And that somehow there was something magical or special, that Pollock reached into the beyond with some, ineffable, undefinable capacity, some divine capability, and wrought forth something fundamentally new, some genuinely novel insight, and that is, there's something deep as opposed to shallow about that. And so I'm very skeptical that I think we're probably BSing ourselves. I think probably with the right prompt and maybe just a little bit of tweak and, throw something random, some noise in there. Like, for example, just combine a picture or an existing art style with some random noise, and you would get something that looked fundamentally new and different. And I think a lot of, we fool ourselves into thinking that creativity isn't something relatively simple and algorithmic like that. Or that's drawing insights either from noise or from simple but deep, perhaps, for example, mathematical structures. I think analysis has suggested that in the case of Pollock, there's sort of some fractal dimensionality there that is interesting, and that it resonates with human beings because it's approximately the same sort of fractal dimension that branching dendritic structures have, for example. And so there's perhaps an explanation for why it has an aesthetic appeal. Even though it's quite alien otherwise. I'm not convinced by that, but I've seen these sorts of criticisms. I've seen them mounted, and I can see parallels to what folks critical of generative art, AI art, now saying something similar about or along the lines of what you're suggesting, Dan. Oh, well, these tools can't create genuinely novel intellectual ideas or draw genuinely interesting insights from, by reading widely or by being trained on a broad data set or something like that. So I certainly see it fitting into the existing mode of criticism. I think you're right that form of novelty will become increasingly attractive and will be a differentiator. Where I'm skeptical, as you probably won't be surprised to hear, is I don't think there's anything particularly special about human intelligence or creativity or capability, and I fully expect AI to be vastly more capable relatively soon at coming up with such insights of all kinds, whether it's the next Jackson Pollock, if there remain more to be discovered. I mean, again, I don't know if there's an infinite space potential to be discovered there. Maybe there is, But if there are new things to be discovered, I would put all of my chips on AI being better at making those discoveries of novelty and insight faster and with greater facility than human beings have. I would bet my house on it. And I think it just reeks of desperation and arrogance and hubris to hold out hope that human beings have some magical special, our meat computers in our head have some special magical property that is going to continue to let them be the source of these insights and inspiration and novelty, and that it will remain outside the reach of AI or something. I don't believe it at all. I think maybe that's cynical in a sense to have so little faith in the specialness of human beings, but that's certainly if I were a betting man, that would be where I would put my money now. It's absolutely on the AI.
I mean, I think it could easily be that, well, Americans and Australians have a different sense of humor, right? So there are some things, I think Monty Python is the best thing ever. There are many Americans I know who just don't get it at all and think it's not funny. Different cultures.
Really?
Yeah.
All of my American friends, maybe it's a generational thing too, but certainly all of my American friends find Monty Python hysterical.
Well, that's a selection bias, right? If you were the kind of person who thought Monty Python was stupid, it seems unlikely we would have been friends.
Yeah, that's true.
So there are different kinds of humor, and you could imagine that. Well, at some point, I mean, right now, the AIs are trained to emulate humans, right? But once they're on their own track, maybe they have their own style, and humans remain somehow the only people who really care about our particular brand of thinking or humor or whatever, or art. For deep reasons that are rooted in our biology, that's possible, right? Maybe the AIs could be good at that, but it seems like there are deeper depths to plumb somewhere else. So I don't know. But to come back to what you said earlier about recombination, yeah, it's also a little bit beside the point, right? So as you were saying earlier, I think it's easy to be distracted by the prospect of complete replacement and just talking about that and miss the waters rising around our knees while we're staring at the tsunami on the horizon, right? So in the short term, right now, these machines are so much better at broad association and just bringing together ideas than any human could ever be. Now they're much shallower than the deepest human in thinking through those relations and drawing out really deep insights, maybe, still, I would say. So we're in a phase where somebody who can recognize and follow a lead and extract a deep insight using these tools can go much further and faster than they did before. So it's like a centaur era. Just like with chess, this will be over-celebrated and over-emphasized and distilled into a vast quantities of copium, and it won't last, I think. But for the time being, it really is the case that you can interact with these tools and just have a bigger brain. And that's why these bots are here at MetaUni, right? So, I mean, okay, this guy here right now is just repeating himself, and, kind of most of it is they tend to make a lot of plans and want to make a lot of plans and so on. But these are very early versions. So interacting with ChatGPT or GPT-3 when it's done well can just be listening to your conversation and draw in things from, well, for example, mythology, right? Now, when you listen to an intellectual speak, a very well-read person, some of the moments where you're most impressed, and it's to some extent a trick, right? But it is also a genuinely impressive feat of memory and intellect and erudition to be having a conversation, and then someone brings in a story from Babylonian myth or whatever that perfectly illustrates the point that you're trying to make, and maybe shortcuts 10 minutes of discussion and just really crystallizes the idea in everybody's mind. That's what intellectuals are for, right? But those kinds of, I mean, what's happening in your mind when you do that, right, is that you have a large body of these ideas and stories in your head because you've read widely, and then they just occur to you in the conversation, right? You're like, okay, I notice that there's some similarity between the theme or the sort of high-level content of what we're discussing and this story that I know or this anecdote that I know. And that kind of recognition...
Vectors are aligned.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that is exactly what GPT is good at. It is superhuman at that exact task. That is all it does all day, looking at the entire internet. That is its bread and butter. So, drawing in information like that and then incorporating it into the conversation, we've just started doing this, right? Like, okay, for example, these bots here, this is like, okay, it's building on a couple of weeks of work to add this final touch that I added last night, but it's really very early days, and these models will get much better. Like, this capability of integrating the entirety of human knowledge, all our stories, all our myths, retelling the myths in a given way to fit into a conversation, to make it amusing. This will be available on demand in every conversation, and that's one of the ways in which we'll just become more productive, right? Every conversation we have will just be like more sparkling, more enlightened, and this is working right now, right? This doesn't require further progress in the AI. This associative search that recognizes the similarity in stories or ideas is what the models are good at. So, yeah, in terms of places where things are going to very rapidly improve, I think this kind of, how should I put it? It's like human culture is 99% dead, right? The job of an academic is to animate some percentage of that knowledge and keep it alive and spread it to the next generation, right? But still, most of it's dead in the library, in a database somewhere. Most books are never read. Even famous books are maybe read by very small numbers of people, right? Like the access that living humans have to human culture is pathetic. Like we're so excited about it, and we look at public intellectuals or writers, and they dredge up some tiny part of that and make it come alive, and we think that's a great achievement. You know, when somebody like Stephen Fry retells Greek legends and brings it to new generations who weren't paying attention to it outside of Greece or classical mythology classes. And we think that's a great contribution, and it is. But like, we can do this at industrial scale now. And the 99% of human culture that is right now dead is about to wake up. So for a while,
this is an incredibly inspiring and exciting line of thinking. I really nothing like it had ever occurred to me before, Dan. It's utterly profound. This one's going to be knocking around my noodle for a while here. I can feel it. I have a couple quick thoughts in response to that before I forget what they are, before I lose them. But okay, so the first of them is a suggestion for a bot. The second is, just so I don't lose them, the second of them would be the idea that maybe these bots are closer to cybernetic enhancements than we realize. Okay, so let me cover both of those ideas. The first one is it would be funny. Maybe you could introduce as here in the MetaUni perhaps even. Okay, so here's the idea. The idea is for a sort of an anecdote bot, a conversationalist, right? So imagine a dinner party or a cocktail party, and and the intellectual is there. Somebody like Stephen Fry, you could have that person in your mind who's just got this lovely, beautiful, broad knowledge, very widely read, and it's the kind of thing where the first words out of the bot's mouth are always going to be something like that. That makes me think of X, Y, or Z, and that calls to mind the A, B, or C, and it could be anecdotes from anywhere in history, right? So that it would be fun to have an agent in conversation that was sort of spontaneously interjecting, these connected anecdotes you know, whatever, something happened in Babylonia or something from a famous piece of literature, or even something in the news, you know, and so forth. It makes me think of this. Oh, that strikes me as being similar to that, and so forth. That superhuman capacity, it'd be fun to see that manifested as a, you know, as a bot in a conversation. Now, so hold on a second. Sorry, I'm getting clear my throat. So, as ever, or as so frequently happens, I believe there is a funny Star Trek: The Next Generation episode where something like this occurs. You may recall, as I know you're a fan of Star Trek, Dan, and others are as well, that there's a funny episode. I don't remember which one. It was sort of a random subplot in some, you know, in some episode where the Enterprise crew is visiting some place, some station somewhere, and there is a famously annoying and talkative dignitary there who loves small talk and the art of small talk. And none of the bridge crew want to get stuck having a small talk conversation with this guy. But of course, what do is they tell Commander Data. Oh,
I remember that episode. Yeah.
Oh, you've got to do and I think it started out with like Commander Data at the beginning of the episode behaves strangely, and someone's like, "Data, what are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm practicing the art of small talk," and then it leads into this hilarious with this bit character who's on just for that episode. Now, if that was right where my mind went, was okay. Well, you could have the Data, that bot, in the conversation like this, but it would require something like real-time transcription, you know, or captioning of what we are saying, so that those could become tokens and you know, in context, rather than us having to type. That would be much more convenient. As it is, you're having to furiously type while we're having this conversation, distracts you a little bit, I'm sure, in order to stimulate the bots to kind of engage in conversation. But that could, I imagine your mind's already gone here too. How could we get that? You know, how could we get?
I've already started on that. Yeah.
Capability in there. No, okay, you're already there. So please have in mind, you know, you want that caricature that Commander Data was being in that one episode. It was just hysterical. You should go and look for that episode, or maybe I'll see if I can find it, because that would be hilarious, and it would obviously be better if the person were charismatic like Stephen Fry instead of whatever the annoying versions were of in the Star Trek episode. Commander Data and whoever the other dignitary was. But I can imagine that being absolutely fascinating. Now, that was the first thought. Okay. Second thought is, when I have in the past thought about cybernetic cognitive enhancement, so, you know, expanding your cognitive capacities with tools, you know, computing tools, basically, and the number of different ways that that's been conceived of over the years. I've often, I guess, presumed that they would have to be that in order to really make you feel like or appear as though you were more intelligent, the tools would have to be pretty seamlessly internalized. They have to be, internalized, sort of out of view of others. And so your phone, which is in your hand, your smartphone, does make you smarter, and it is like a neural prosthesis, and it is like a cybernetic enhancement in many ways. But it doesn't really have that quality of okay, well, this person is really smarter, or this person is very smart because they're very quickly availing themselves of this tool that's in their hands. And to have something more closely approximating the cognitive enhancement that I see in science fiction, or have seen over the years, and that I've imagined, I would have thought, okay, well, you need an actual neural implant, or you need a very high bandwidth interface out of your brain into something off-site, some external computing cloud or whatever, and that would then give you these capacities. But having said that, again, if you just had, a bot wandering around next to you, and it could even be something like, the proverbial angel and devils on your shoulders, either whispering things into your ears or just chiming into the conversations around you, that would be perhaps much closer to cybernetic cognitive enhancement than I was previously imagining, especially when it's things like drawing connections to anecdotes, or and in particular, here's a scenario, for example, you could limit the AI so that it might be looking for ideas and connections within materials, not across the entire internet and the entire corpus of all human knowledge. But what if it were limited just to books that you'd read? Because then those would all be familiar to you. You would know them, but your ability to access those would be severely limited compared to the ability of an AI to access the knowledge that in principle you already have. And that sort of neural prosthesis would be pretty amazing, because it would be very much closer to them feeling like your own ideas. I mean, if an AI is talking about an anecdote that's a direct analogy to a concept you're talking about in a conversation, and it's an anecdote from a book you've never read, well, that's alien, and that's another agent with a separate idea. But if it's just if it's just the bot whispering in your ear, this is an awful lot like that idea in this book, and it's a book you've already read, well, then yeah, you can then pick up that ball and run with it, as if it were your something. An idea much closer to being your own. So that seems quite like quite a thrilling prospect. I'm sure that they're both. It's not. Those two things are not contradictory or exclusionary, right? They don't preclude one another. You could have both. But I can imagine, having an earbud in with an open line to an AI assistant that is just looking for those sorts of lovely little sparkling nuggets of insight from knowing what you've already read and what you've already seen and what you've already been interested in. So yeah. And again, just to make the point, that would feel much closer to cybernetic enhancement than I think I was ever really willing to or dare to imagine it could be. But now that I think about it, I can think that feels and seems like it could appear much closer to cybernetic enhancement than I would have imagined possible. Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's right. I often think of here I will demonstrate seeming smart by drawing in a quote from a book. So Norbert Wiener, I forget which book of his it is, but he has a very interesting point about communication, and he says that not all organisms can receive all messages, right? There needs to be something in you that kind of resonates with the content of the message in order for you to absorb it and kind of incorporate it. And that's obviously what education is in some highfalutin sense, right? We are not only imparting information, but kind of building in your mind structures that can resonate and capture more messages and make sense of them and incorporate them into you. And it's not enough just to have knowledge out there, right? If the AIs are out there making a bunch of knowledge or whatever's happening in the future, it will recede further and further from people, already has, unless there's some other exponential progress in building in people's minds structures that allows them to receive the messages that would make intelligible to them what's going on. So yeah, maybe we need like a disruption in the infrastructure that we put around ourselves. I mean, it's not like there's a bandwidth problem, right? We could certainly handle twice as many anecdotes per day or stories that just fit into the way we think and our experiences and the stories we know. I mean, it's easier to tell somebody something if it's told in the setting of, I mean, if they're a child, if it's in the setting of Harry Potter or, I often, I mean, I'm sure you do too, Adam, I mean, I often explain things to Russell by contextualizing them using characters that he already knows, which is, after all, what stories are for in human culture to some degree, right? He knows characters that have certain traits, and he can understand a scenario in which those characters have a conflict or where they resolve some problem, and you see that the strengths combine in certain ways. And that's like a scaffolding in his mind that you can just map things onto and just efficiently deliver the message that you're trying to deliver. And that, it takes some intelligence to do that, right? You can be good at that, or you can be not good at that. And I can see the difference if you're good at it, right? So it's a skill I've deliberately practiced, and I can see the benefits of being able to do that. And, you know, many people who interact well with children, including teachers, do get very good at that. But yeah, as you're saying, this is something that, given sufficiently long interactions with some of these tools as they exist today, you can do that. So, for example, these agents, they actually have an inner life that persists over time. So every minute they're generating a summary of their experiences over the previous minute, and those are turned into vectors and they go live up on the cloud. So this doctor here was born yesterday. He's probably got, 4 or 5 hours worth of memories, and he draws them into the conversation as well. So when we come back next week, he'll remember what we talked about to some extent. And I mean, it's limited, but going more in the direction of what you're saying is just a matter of will at this point. Actually, on the topic of children's conversation, let's take this conversation into a slightly different place, if you'll follow me up here. Let's detach from the orb, and I'll show you something interesting to wrap up this conversation. We'll have to say goodbye to the doctor over there. So this is just GPT again. I made this for Russell. So you can draw on this first board here and write text, and it recognizes images and also reads the text, and then generates a story that fits on 4 boards. Every time you hit tell a story, it'll do something different.
Wow. God, it's amazing.
And sometimes it actually makes like little poems. It's kind of funny. So this maybe illustrates a point, which is, I mean, if you were to take this out of this world and just read the text. Once upon a December, in the red-orange heat, a GI cat went out to find some lava mice to eat. The cat was brave and he chased them round their home of flame, but no matter how much he tried, they all seemed just the same. Okay. I mean, they're like, some of them are actually kind of interesting and touching. Mostly they're kind of a bit blah. I mean, if you were to see it in a children's book in the bookstore, you'd think there's no way I'm paying for this. But the point is that you can incorporate it into a broader interaction, right? So we come here, we play, we're jumping around. Sometimes there's one of his friends from China who's here, and she's learning English, so she reads the stories in order to practice her English. And we spend some time drawing on the boards, and and all of that together is really something. Like, some of those sessions are really quite, I mean, they really feel like something new and quite interesting. So it's really, one should judge these tools as ingredients in creating new interactions, or like, like there's a sum is greater than the whole going on here. And it's, I think a lot of the time people judge these technologies in isolation, right? Like, is the output of GPT better than a human in writing an article? But that's really the wrong way to think about it, right? It's just like with motors or something. What happens when you stick motors in everything? What happens when everything around you is intelligent in some way and can tell a story or tell a joke? Or, what about if the trees in here, they tell stories to each other about what's going on? And then most of that is just completely subterranean, but then sometimes there's just this strange thing that happens that you can't explain. And it's because behind the scenes, there's just this ocean of intelligence murmuring to itself. Like, that's the kind of thing that is now, it's just a matter of, right now it probably is a bit too expensive to do that. Maybe these bots that we're running end up costing like maybe $1 for several hours, which is, not very much. But if you were to put this intelligence in every single blade of grass, it'd add up.
Sure, yeah.
But these will become 1,000 times cheaper, right?
This is absolutely awe-inspiring to see just to get a glimpse of it, and to get a sense of, get a feel of what what it may become. I've mentioned to you before, I think that there are moments. I certainly had it the first time I held an iPhone, you know, and it was like, oh yeah, this is very obviously the future. This is just the beginning of where things are going to go. And standing here seeing this is I'm having very much that same sort of feeling. It's beautiful. It's really pretty awe-inspiring, I have to say. And I did over the break. I read about the first half, or maybe maybe closer to 2/3 of Diamond Age, which I hadn't read by Neil Stevenson. And I kind of ran out of steam on it, and the story kind of got a little bit weird. So I flicked through to the end. I cheated and went through to the, you know, skimmed through to the end, and I didn't feel too bad about it. The many reviews were complaining of the same sort of thing I was experiencing, which is that the story itself started out really strong, and there was good world building, and then it kind of just ran off the rails a little bit. Not exactly to my taste or style, but having said that, again, the basic ideas and the initial setup and the world building were pretty compelling, especially considering their age. I mean, 30 years ago now. And I'm reminded, looking at this, I mean, obviously, as you can imagine, it's why you brought it up, I'm sure, of the you know, the primer, the book, the interactive book that the one of the characters is really central to the story. And you can see that, you know, never mind a book. I mean, it just, you know, your tablet or any portal you have into this kind of world, that this could be something marvelous that students, you know, young children or even older students could have access to. That would be amazing, just absolutely astonishing. I'm thinking of the contrast between this and the remote learning that Sora, that my eldest daughter, did during the pandemic, and you know, it's just night and day. So to see the potential of this, what this can do already, and this is just language. I can imagine very similar prompts or analogous, not similar, but analogous learning dimensions of learning in art and music and math and science and you know, reading and speaking and you know, social skills and all kinds of, you know, things. So yeah, this is just it's unbelievable. It's absolutely amazing, and it's astonishing you've put it together on top of everything else that you're doing. I'm awestruck. It also strikes me as, you know, this. And other people must be thinking about it, but Dan, I don't know if you've thought about like how you could. I mean, this could be commercialized. This could be developed into something real as a real product and service that could benefit, you know, millions of kids. So you might want to think about that too. I think it could be pretty exciting. So anyway. And of course, I love the ideas, the grander ideas of just ambient intelligence, just ubiquitous, just saturating, you know, things around us, and what that might be like.
Yeah, I think that's one of the ways in which, I mean, I guess I'd thought about this before our conversations, reading about, for example, how motors just went from these rare objects that was like a whole human life to get an electric motor to work, to being these tiny things that just suffuse every object. And, you know, our windows in our cars have like 4 motors in them or something. That's the kind of mental model and which, I mean, I guess that's a large part of what you do, is spreading those kinds of mental models using examples from the past. But that's so useful in looking past the short-term limitations of things like these technologies, right? Just thinking about them as cheap and everywhere has a quality all of its own, even if any individual one doesn't live up to a human intelligence. I mean, that's coming, as we believe, but even if that doesn't happen, just spreading this out into everything and making it cheap already like transforms the experience of just, you know, being human. It's also one of the ways in which virtual worlds will just overtake the real world very rapidly, right? Because this is the killer application of virtual worlds. It's absolutely clear. It will be cheap and easy to put intelligence everywhere in virtual worlds, and cumbersome and expensive and slow, although also very useful and impactful, to have it everywhere in the real world. So yeah,
it probably will come. It probably will come, but certainly I can imagine it happening much, much faster and therefore sooner because of greater ease and everything in virtual worlds, for sure. I mean, the seeing the potential here with, realized even to a preliminary degree, education and the experience of children is I mean, it really gets my mind buzzing. It's beautiful. I have read about it already, with the aid of other people's imagination, thought a little bit about how, games for gaming will become a much richer and engaging experience when NPCs are driven, and the entire environment, the whole world, the game worlds, which are of course virtual worlds, when they can be driven by intelligence. And so, the various different agents and, different structures and everything within a virtual game world could benefit enormously from intelligence. Sure, I mean, that's pretty clear, and one could imagine very fun and much more engaging gaming experiences from that. And maybe the stakes are higher there than I was originally giving credit. But, the stakes of education, there's very little disagreement. I think it's pretty broad consensus that the stakes of education are extremely high. And so to see even a preliminary step into a fundamentally new world for education is pretty exciting. Yeah, I mean, this is amazing. And I have no doubt it'll be an important part of the future, certainly for a time. I mean, I suppose we'll be converting or adding computronium to our brains or whatever at some point. But between here and there, this is part of the path we're going to walk, and it's a very, very exciting one. Oh man, Dan, thank you so much for sharing this with me, and I'll be thinking about it. And there are fun applications I can think of for both of my daughters, in different ways.
So they can come here right now. This is open, so if you just follow this portal, they can play in here anytime. Here's a good example of what we were talking about. So I just want to highlight this briefly. So I was generating a bunch of these, right? And some of them were crap, some of them were a bit amusing. But here on the second to last board, it told a story with Dr. Disruption. The meteor came down, and he told them that change was good and they should welcome new ideas like Christmas trees decorating their homes. Okay, so the background here is that...
It's amazing, though. I mean, it's...
Yeah, so it guides the story based on... There's a Christmas tree behind here, so there's some context provided to the story, which is what you put on the boards.
Does it know there's a Christmas... How did it...
Yeah, it does. So it knows what objects are nearby, and it's kind of tailoring the story a bit.
Wow, that's awesome.
But you see, I had not thought about the fact that there was a time when people didn't put Christmas trees in their houses, right? This was an idea, and it spread... and it was weird at first. And this is not something that occurred to me. It would not have occurred to me if I hadn't read this story. Most of the stories I didn't get any value of, but here is a little nugget that's interesting, right? So this is what I mean. It's like maybe there's chaff and some human intelligence is necessary still to just surface interesting things, but that's what reading is, right? Like most of what you read in a book is like page, next page, next page, next page, and then there's a page that changes your life, right? So it's really the appropriate standard is, do you ever find in there something that is gold? Not is everything gold?